85%. 85% of US consumers have already taken steps to protect their online privacy, according to Deloitte's 2024 Connected Consumer Survey. 75% of consumers feel powerless when trying to protect their personal data, and 25% believe that both companies and hackers can access their data no matter what they do. These are not random numbers, these are your customers. And yes, targeting is getting harder and cookies are disappearing, and us marketers are scrambling for solutions. So, how can you maintain ad performance without fulfilling your customers' fears about the use of their personal data? I'm Benjamin Shapiro, and joining me today is Graham Mudd, the SVP of Product at Anonym, which was recently acquired by Mozilla. And today, Graham is going to explain how privacy preserving technologies can actually improve your targeting results. Graham, welcome to the MarTech Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Excited to have you here. Congratulations. Your company, your privacy-centric advertising company was acquired by Mozilla, an industry leader, which goes without saying. And I'm excited to have you on the podcast to talk a little bit about a new way of advertising. Let's start off at the top. Can effective targeting coexist with consumer privacy?
I think it can. You knew I'd say that, right?
Of course.
But absolutely, right? No, absolutely, I think it can. I think, look, first-party data is really the mantra these days. In the days where it's getting harder and harder to find consumers, it's really important to use the data that you have, and base your targeting on your existing users who tell you a lot about the types of people who are going to buy your product in the future. And so in our world, what we really focus on is leveraging that first party data, using advanced and privacy safe machine learning techniques to find people who look like your existing customers, but doing it in a way that doesn't require you to share those customers' data with any of the ad platforms that you want to work with. And so I think, that is a tried and true method, this idea of a lookalike model. It's been around for a long time. What we've done is tried to find ways to leverage that exact same technology, but do it in a privacy safe way, in a trusted execution environment. We can talk more about the tech later. But the important thing is find a way to use that data without sharing it with platforms who you may not be able to or want to.
One of my favorite GPT prompts is explain it to me like I'm an eighth grader. Generally, I understand how eighth graders think, apparently. And I want to get into a little bit about consumer-friendly privacy, but it's also targeting. And those two things seem to be at odds. So my layman's term of how I think about privacy is you go online, you conduct an activity, something gets dropped in your browser, or there's some sort of tracking, the company gets some data, and then they can use that hopefully on their own sites, but potentially other places as well. How can you do that without knowing who the person is?
Yeah, sure. So I think you're absolutely right. The way that you described the way it's been done for a long time. In the background, that was a key. I think you use those terms. In the background, you're collecting information about consumers, and it's that collection of data without them even understanding it that can, I think, disturb and disappoint your customers. Instead of doing that, what we've encouraged our customers to do is use the data that you're collecting from the interactions that you have with consumers. In other words, if you're a retailer and someone's buying a product from you, they're of course giving you their email address and their phone number and so forth. If they give you permission at that moment to reach out to them directly, deterministically, I want to hear from you again about sales or new products or whatever, great. Use email, use all of the custom audience techniques at major ad platforms, reach them directly. But a lot of the people that you have as customers likely won't give you that permission. They will say, no, I'm happy that you sold me the product, but I would prefer you not share my data with marketing platforms. Yep. Okay, great. Well, then let's figure out how we still use that data, but do so in a way that doesn't require you to share their data and violate the promise you just made to them. And so that's where we move from sort of a deterministic approach, one to one. Ben gave me his email address. I am now going to reach Ben using that email address, to a predictive approach where we use the data that we have to find people who look like Ben but aren't Ben. And that's, I think, a really powerful way to use data that doesn't require you to give it out, to marketing platforms, and again, violate that promise that you've made to consumers when they tell you they don't want you to share their data.
I've got a bad dating metaphor that I'm going to try to roll out without
Okay.
offending anybody. What I'm hearing from you is consumers are basically saying, thanks for the drinks, but I don't want a second date.
I
And
love it.
so they don't want to share or for you to continue to reach out to them. And the privacy friendly way of advertising is not saying, well, I'm going to track you around everywhere you go and hopefully show up in front of you again and maybe you'll change your mind. It is, you know what, you liked going on dates with this person and they said yes to at least one. Here's where other people like them are going.
That's exactly what dating apps do, I bet. You swiped right, these two connected, it didn't work. We're gonna find people that maybe are like that person, and
Long,
maybe
tall, skinny, brunette, whatever it is, but you're using
right.
the other variables and identifiers and essentially creating profiles. So let's talk a little bit about the competitive landscape. I get the general, like, how consumer friendly privacy works, where you don't track individual people, but you're targeting essentially look-alike audiences, right?
That's
People
right.
with the same profiles, hopefully the same ROI,
Hmm.
or dating habits, depending on what metaphor we're using. It sounds very similar to Google's privacy sandbox. So, how does the technology differ between Mozilla and Anonym solution and what Google is doing?
Yeah, you bet. So I think in spirit, you're right, that Sandbox is trying to accomplish a lot of the same types of use cases that we are, and I'd say the big two use cases are measurement, and there are a handful of forms of measurement. Did my marketing work, and then how do I make it work better? And targeting is a big piece of that. You could just call that ad delivery, but I want to find the right people. Now, how are we different, you asked? Well, I think the primary way that we're different is what Sandbox is largely based on is the browser, is Chrome. And it is finding ways to collect information about the user through the browser, but then not sharing user level data from the browser, instead doing some on device work, doing it in confidential computing environments like we use, and so forth. But it's based on browser data collection for the most part. Whereas our solution doesn't use browser-based data collection, and instead uses the first-party data of the marketer themselves. Okay, so let's just go back to the retailer example. You're a retailer. You've got you would think, a pretty rich CRM of all of your customer data and so forth. That's the data source for all of our work, whether it be measurement or audiences, developing audiences, targeting. On the other hand, what Chrome would do would be to say, I'm going to try to observe your customers converting after seeing an ad in the browser, and I'm going to take that data and do interesting things with it. So, very different. The benefit, just to be super clear, of a
Mhm.
browser-based approach is browsers are, if you're lucky to be in Chrome's position, you have fantastic market share, and that's a rich source of data if you can get brands and companies and so forth to opt into it. The one of the downsides of it is browser based, and therefore it is not cross device. It doesn't, it's hard to do anything that tries to either measure or activate users when they move from a browser on their iPad to their phone to their laptop to whatever. Ours is kind of platform agnostic. It doesn't really matter where the data was collected by the retailer. As long as they have it, we can use it.
Let's talk about how it works. What evidence shows that privacy preserving targeting, the Anonym methodology, works as well as the ad tech solutions that kind of disregard consumer privacy, basically your cookie based stuff?
The work that we've done has largely compared what happens when you use our approach to private machine learning, which is everything we just talked about, compared to if you did broad targeting on an ad platform and sort of let the algorithm alone find the users. And so I can tell you that what we see is hugely variable. And you can imagine why that might be. If you're, for instance, marketing laundry detergent, everyone does laundry. And
Sure.
so, broad targeting, you can imagine it works pretty darn well, right?
I work
Because,
for a laundry startup. Sorry to interrupt you. I work for a laundry and dry
yeah,
cleaning delivery startup. Marketing laundry services is harder than you think it might be.
okay. All right, Coca-Cola. We'll use a different one, or soda. If it's a very widely used product, it's it high reach marketing and broad targeting can work really, really well. But if it's more of a niche offering, then you need precision. If you don't want to waste your marketing dollars, pretty straightforward
Mhm.
notion. So you can imagine if we're making comparisons to broadly targeted products, we're not going to do quite as well. Whereas if it's a more niche offering, we tend to do really well. On average, what that's boiled down to is roughly a 30% increase in the efficiency of finding converters using our method relative to sort of a baseline.
It seems like the underlying, and we kind of get into this conversation with synthetic data too. You need a small amount of
Mhm.
data to be able to create what I'm inferring is kind of like a lookalike model, right?
That's
Where
right. It
you've
is.
got some data, you've got some first party conversions, you're targeting lookalikes and trying to find other similar people as opposed to being direct looking for specific interactions. A 30% lift sounds phenomenal. So, how is it possible that you're inferring that people will convert so much better and so much more efficiently than using people that have the exact same pattern of behavior? Why a 30% lift?
Okay. So I think I want to make sure that I'm clear on the comparison here. The comparison isn't if I retarget users who I have seen directly, putting detergent in their Amazon, cart, for example, compared to our method of a lookalike model. I would suspect that in that case we wouldn't probably compare, all that favorably. We really are focusing more on like the prospecting use case. I
Hmm.
want to find more new customers, people that I don't have a relationship with, that I
Okay.
don't have a cookie on, that I don't have, and so that's really where we're focused on.
Am I oversimplifying by
No.
saying this is like a lookalike audience for open web? I think of like I do a Facebook campaign, I see my conversions, I take my conversions, I create a lookalike, now I can expand my audience. It seems like a very similar
Yes.
process for open web.
It's a very similar process, although it does work on walled gardens. It's not just for sort of the open web, except in our world, you don't have to share your conversion data with a platform, whereas you do in the one you just mentioned.
Can you share your conversion data? Does that actually provide more efficiency? It seems like that's good data to give to, even if it's an anonymous platform, of like, yes, this, it's not a pixel, but this type of user that you're looking for. I'll go back to my dating metaphor. Tall, skinny brunette. Yes, that was a conversion, right? Like something that's not tall, skinny, and brunette was not. Now I know how to refine my lookalike audience. Doesn't the conversion matter?
I think what you had mentioned is the idea of using your conversion data as observed by Meta to
Hmm.
build a lookalike audience. This is different in the sense that you don't need Meta to have your conversion data for this to work. We take that conversion data, we put it together with user data from ad platforms,
I
and
get
we
it. Okay.
build that lookalike model. Then we upload that lookalike model.
There still is a full funnel conversion from ad
Yes.
delivery to a specific target down to conversion. It's just that you're getting the conversion data, uh, and you don't actually have the user identifier, so it's still private as opposed to feeding Meta the conversion, and now they're getting all of the PII for which person converted.
We do have the PII from both the ad platform and the advertiser. It's in this confidential computing environment. That's where the ML happens. And then the audience is shared with the ad platform. We don't share any PII that they don't already have. So what we're basically, our ML model is saying users A, B, D, F, Y, and Z are good customers for
Mhm.
brand
Right.
X, go,
Yes.
go target them.
It's not that the PII
We're
doesn't exist, it's that it's not
right.
shared with the marketer.
You got it.
Got it. Okay. Uh, Talk to me about who this is for. What companies should be pivoting towards privacy friendly targeting?
I think eventually this is going to be for everybody in the sense that I think the direction of travel on privacy as it relates to ads is very clear. So our bet is that over the course of the next, handful of years, this is going to be increasingly sort of the standard in terms of the approach. I think in Europe, it's already very much that's the case. In a handful of states in the U.S., we're there, and it's kind of shifting over the course of the next couple of years. But right now, we're seeing a handful of segments really benefiting from this. I think one is if you're in a sensitive vertical, and examples of those might be healthcare, financial services, education, credit, things that have a lot of regulation around them. This is a good, privacy tech is a good unlock for you. Second, if you are an app advertiser, in other words, if you care a lot about app-based conversions, especially iOS conversions, there's a lot of constraints on how you can use that data or even get access to that data as a result of iOS's ATT or App Tracking Transparency. And so that's another sort of big vertical or big segment for us. And then a third I mentioned, which is sort of geographically sensitive. You're in a regulated market, or you want to be in a regulated market, and you need to use this kind of data. So those are three. One last one would be, if you believe, and a lot of folks do, particularly bigger players, that their data, their conversion data on their users is a real valuable asset for the company, and you don't want to share that, not necessarily to protect your consumers, although you may also care about that. It's more, I have really valuable information on consumers and their intent, and when I put it into the black box of a major ad platform, I worry that it's going to benefit my competitors in ways that I don't really like.
Hmm.
And so I would rather find ways to use that data that don't require me to share it directly with an ad platform. That's another, sort of near-term value proposition for us, forgetting completely about regulation and user privacy.
Yeah, if I read that back, what I'm hearing is if you are in a very competitive market and you're the market leader and you don't want to
That's
put
right.
your conversions into Facebook so your competitors can then essentially market against who has converted to become your customer, privacy centric tracking and conversion works. Talk to me a little about not just the tracking piece, but also the other end where you're doing the monetization and evaluation. How do you figure that out?
I think activating an audience and finding the relevant audience is of course a really critical element of it. But then understanding how well that worked and learning from your previous campaign so that you can do better the next time is, of course, a best practice. We've focused on building two measurement methodologies out that leverage the same sort of technology. One is, the core, which is attribution. And what you're looking for, of course, is did people convert and buy my product after having seen an ad? And you tend to use, business rules or heuristics that say, look, it has to be the last touch, or it has to be a touch within 7 days, or there's a whole bunch of different ways, and it's all very configurable. But there's we using those same two data sets, the impression data and the conversion data, you put them together, you can run an algorithm on that data and say, here's how many attributed conversions this campaign was responsible for. The other is, sort of closer to the scientific method, right? Where you're doing experiments, test versus control, in ad parlance, incrementality. And so here, what you're doing is you're setting up an experiment, typically through an ad platform where they hold out impressions from some of your audience. We get data from the ad platform about who saw the ad, who was in the test group, and who was in the control group. And then we compare using the conversion data to see if the ads resulted in conversions that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't shown them an ad. And that is, oftentimes called the gold standard in measurement. And we think it's really important. What we tend to see is that advertisers use attribution for tactical learning. This creative worked, this one didn't, or this targeting worked, or this one didn't. Whereas they use lift or incrementality measurement to understand allocation decisions. Look, this was really incremental and put more money into this platform or to this placement. This one wasn't very incremental. I'm going to start moving money elsewhere.
When you're looking at lift and that sort of incrementality, I always think of those as being longer term evaluation periods. Are you able to get feedback to understand your ad campaign performance in real time or close to it if you're trying to rely
Good,
on things like lift?
good question. It is definitely not as real time as attribution is. But again, with incrementality, what it all really comes down to is statistical power. If you're running a huge campaign and there's a lot of spend, a lot of people being reached, you can get reads of the incrementality within a week. If you're running a smaller campaign that's sort of trickled out over a month,
Mhm.
it's unlikely, unless the campaign is working incredibly well, that you're going to be able to see the delta between test and control very quickly. So
Yeah.
that's why I said, attribution is often the tactical evaluation, because you need that real-time signal of let's twist the knobs in this during the campaign. Whereas, a bigger decision is how much am I going to spend, and you don't make that, typically day to day.
Yeah, it seems like there is an optimization metric and then there is an
That's right.
evaluation metric, and your lift really tells you whether the campaign was worth it or not. Last question I want to ask you before we get into our lightning round. I know you're on the product side, but you're also the CEO of the privacy friendly tech company. I want you to look into the crystal ball. I'm assuming you know more about the regulations in privacy than
Yeah.
I do. So help marketers understand what's coming down the pike, as we think about what ad solutions we should be betting on over the next year or so. How is the landscape changing and where should we put our chips?
Just to correct, I wasn't the CEO. My partner Brad Smallwood was, but I was
Sorry,
a
Brad.
co-founder with him. No, that's all right. I just I don't want to hear it from him. But no, he would. So to answer your question, where are things headed? I actually just spent a week in DC and then another week in Brussels talking to regulators, civil society folks, and so forth. I think that as I said, direction of travel is clear. Regulators and legislators are clearly hearing from consumers. You got to do something about this. At the same time, like it or not, there is a sort of anti-big tech, zeitgeist right now,
Unless
and that
it's
is
unless it's
driving.
AI tech, then everybody loves it.
That may be true. Yeah. So, you see that kind of influencing decision making, and they're trying to find ways to constrain these companies. And again, not issuing an opinion on that, but that's just reality. So, what we're basically seeing is, sort of a couple of key trends. One is it doesn't look like much is going to happen on the federal front. I don't want to discount completely that possibility, but it seems unlikely.
Mhm.
Instead, what seems likely in the next couple of years, we're already at 19 states with comprehensive privacy legislation, and that will no doubt move up to 25, 30 over the course of the next couple of years. And once you get to that level, you're kind of in a de facto federal state, because like at some point it's not efficient to try to treat each state a little bit differently. You just go to the lowest common denominator. So that's what's happening there. And then in Brussels, I think what they're looking at is how do we make changes to GDPR and the e-privacy directive that just make it easier to operate. And one of the things that we were really advocating for is make it very clear as in this regulation that if you use privacy enhancing technologies in such a way that you're not sharing your users' data with other companies, then you're doing the right thing. And it's okay, because right now that legislation was written so long ago, these technologies didn't even exist. And so there's a lot of sort of opacity and unclear. And it's unclear what is and is not okay. I hope they update that. That is their plan. We'll see what it says.
What I'm hearing from you is there is I don't know, ground wave of continued privacy regulation. It's not a large piece of legislation coming out from the EU or from the United States government. It's
Yeah.
individual entities are all making their own rules, which means operationally you have to kind of go to the lowest common denominator, as you said. So
Yeah.
privacy is going to get harder and harder to manage because there's different rules in different places.
That's right. And so, sort of our argument to, businesses is, look, like you can either try to parse all of these little things and stay, abreast of all of it, or you can move to approaches that are fundamentally more privacy preserving by their very nature, and that are able to sort of adapt for you. Right. So you should continue. What your focus should be is really good marketing in the form of great creative, great products, all the fundamentals, and building relationships with and gathering first party data. Let the privacy folks out there that really understand how to deploy tech to protect that data and those users, let them be the experts in that, unless you really want to go out and build all that stuff yourself.
All right, Graham, I want to move on to our lightning round where I'm going to ask you some MarTech questions related to this week's topic, which is privacy friendly ad targeting. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Here we go. All right. Does contextual targeting actually outperform audience based approaches?
I can't give you a yes or no. I'd say it can in endemic categories, auto, trader, and Ford. Yeah, I'm sure that works great. But it only monetizes a small portion of the web, and if you constrain yourself to that, I think you're missing out.
It seems like there's really three buckets here. I framed it as contextual targeting and audience based approaches. There's also this privacy centric, which is what you're doing. Am I thinking of the segmentation correctly? Is it contextual
Hmm.
versus cookie based?
Here would be my framework. I would say you're either targeting the context of the page.
Mhm.
What's the user reading right now, and we want to
Sports
try to
fans
pair
on
an ad.
ESPN.
Right. That's contextual, or it's behavioral. Now, behavioral, then you have two buckets, I think. You've got the sort of legacy approaches, which are not particularly privacy preserving,
Mhm.
and then you have privacy preserving approaches to behavioral. We're still using behavioral data, right? Your first party data is an incredible, first party, or sorry, behavioral gold mine. We're just using it in ways that don't compromise the privacy. So we do behavioral targeting, or behavioral audiences. We just don't do it in ways that that require you to share your data with everyone.
Help me rank universally unknown conversion rates between the three options: privacy friendly behavioral, privacy non-friendly behavioral, and contextual advertising. If you had your money and all you care about is
Mhm.
ROI, where are you putting it?
I bet on behavioral first. So between that first decision tree, behavioral and contextual, I bet on behavioral. I think behaviors are the best prediction. Past behaviors are the best predictions of future behaviors, and that makes the most sense. If you ask me now to bet on the sort of privacy preserving or not, of course I'm going to go with privacy preserving. I don't think the trade-off is meaningful, and I think in the long run you're doing the right thing for your business and your customers.
All right, let's move on to our next question. I promise I'll keep this one easier for you. Are clean rooms actually solving privacy problems, or are they just adding complexity?
It's not easier. But look, kidding aside, I'd say they're a piece of the puzzle, but there's nothing inherently private about a clean room. All a clean room is a form of confidential computing. Two parties put data into a place and they do stuff with that data. What you do with that data is what makes it private or not. And the FTC actually put a blog post out a couple of months ago, and they said, "Hey guys, it was to the ad industry. These clean rooms that you guys are all talking about, all fine and good, not private in and of themselves. If you deploy privacy safe and privacy preserving methodologies inside the clean room, then you're doing the right thing. If you just do what you were doing outside the clean room, in the clean room, there's nothing clean about it."
I know I'm going to get myself into trouble with this, but it
Yeah.
sounds like the champagne room for advertising, where it's like just because it's a
Oh
room with
boy.
privacy doesn't mean you can't break the rules inside of it.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Without commenting on your analogy, I think that's fair.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to the next question before one of us gets in trouble. What convinced you to leave your VP role at Meta to found a privacy focused startup?
Yeah, good question. Look, I had a great run there. 10 years is a long time. Company changed an enormous amount in the period I was there, and I really did love my time there. I'd say, a couple of things on the opportunity front. I left right around the time that everything was really exploding as it relates to ads privacy. I saw an opportunity. While I was there, were looking for companies like the one I started. They didn't exist, and that really told me like this is the future. Let's go build a company that can help companies adapt to all the change that's headed their way. So that was the first thing. Second was I'd been wanting for a long time to do something entrepreneurial, and I had a great partner that I'd worked with for a long time. He was interested in the same space, and it just sort of occurred to me if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. Like there couldn't be stars are aligned. You got to take the jump. And so that was number two. And then number three, like I really believe this is the way the industry should move. And so setting aside the commercial opportunity, setting aside the like learning and the stretch that is becoming a startup founder requires, it was really also just like this is the right thing for the world, and I want to go help to build it.
I'm doing everything I can as a podcast host to not fall into the trap of VP of marketing spills the tea about privacy issues at Facebook, because
Ah,
it's such an easy narrative to go after
I get
Facebook
it.
because of the historical Cambridge Analytica. We've all heard the
Yeah.
story and told it a million times. But there is an interesting story here of being at a company that is not known for being very privacy friendly, quite the opposite for
hmm
most people, to now being the privacy friendly advertising guy. Is there a learning from being in the Facebook environment that helped you, let's say, see the light that privacy concerns and privacy centric advertising should be the way?
Yeah, I mean, look, a big part of my role for probably the last 3 years that I was there was kind of thinking about and helping to develop a strategy for the company and for the broader industry as it relates to privacy. We saw this train coming at us, right? There was the Apple change, regulation coming from all over the world. It was, you didn't have to be a genius to know that like this was going to disrupt our business. And so, as part of that, I did a lot of work to think about, all right, well, how can we adapt to the future? How can the industry adapt to what's coming? And one of the things I did was to look at other industries that had faced very similar changes or challenges, right? If you think about, healthcare and HIPAA changing that industry, you think about financial services, highly regulated now, didn't used to be. And nobody stays up at night thinking, is healthcare going to survive until tomorrow? Will financial services, will the banks be okay? They're doing just fine, right? And they were able to adapt. And a big part of the reason they were able to adapt is they developed new technologies that allowed them to use data in ways that preserved the privacy of their users. And it just like seemed to me like to be abundantly obvious that ads can do exactly the same thing. There's nothing magical about ads in terms of the data that we use. And frankly, if you can do a clinical trial in a privacy safe way and, people's lives are at stake, we can probably serve ads.
All right, let's move on to our last
Absolutely.
question. What mistakes are marketers making by investing in first party data strategies?
Look, I think investing in first-party data strategies make a lot of sense. So I wouldn't say like don't do that. That's a mistake. I think that's actually it's a way for you to control your destiny. I think when you don't have that and you're just relying on, I'm going to use the platforms and all of the data that they collect and just try to find users based on their data, you're sort of outsourcing your future in a lot of ways. So first off, I would say keep it up in terms of investing in first party. I'd say there's kind of a mistake that companies make in being too aggressive in how they use that data. So that would mean I'm going to take data that I gathered from my customers, who presumably you really value, and sharing it broadly in ways that disturb them and violate their expectations and
Mhm.
and their trust and so forth. So that's obviously not good. And then I think there's also the opposite side of the coin, which is folks who are being overly conservative in the sense that like, look, I've got all this valuable data about my customers, but they didn't give me permission to share it, and so I guess I just can't use it. And I think there's a middle ground here, which is I'm going to find the way to use the data assets that I have that doesn't require me to share, but does allow me to utilize that gold mine. That's I think the key. But you can make a mistake going too far or not far enough.
Yeah, it's funny. I thought your answer was going to be how much data you actually need. There's the rise of this notion of synthetic data and all the artificial
Hmm.
intelligence that we're able to use now, where, as it turns out, you don't have to have first party data on everyone and have that much data to really have a valuable data set. Give me a couple thoughts on the rise of synthetic data and how much data marketers should prioritize as collecting first party data or just exploding their first party data into a larger data set.
Yeah, so I think synthetic data approaches are interesting. I, to be honest, have not seen one in practice. That has where I've seen data that like really proves that it works. But in theory, I can certainly believe it. I think the important thing though to recognize is anything that is using AI or ML, which are basically the same thing in a lot of ways, it requires training data, right? You have to have a truth set if you want to train, if you want to even develop synthetic data. So if your point is, look, I don't have to have data on every potential customer out there, and which would mean going out and buying data for non-customers, I'm completely with you. I totally agree. But if you want to train a model or develop synthetic data, you have to have some understanding of what a good customer looks like based on reality, right? Based on this person bought something from me and it cost this much, and they came back 2 weeks later and bought again. And so you got to have the truth set. How big that is dependent entirely on sort of how big of an audience you want to create or how big of a customer set you're going after. Again, comes back to sort of this notion of, is this a niche product, or is this a sort of broad appeal product? Those are going to require different scales of trading data.
Yeah, I think about the privacy friendly approach to advertising, and my head is in two different camps. As a marketer, I'm terrified. I want access to my data. I want to be able to find my customers and target them and track them around the internet. And it's just the methodology I'm used to. And on the
That's right.
consumer side, I believe in privacy and protection. And I don't want my data out there readily available for everyone to sell to me, or even worse sometimes. So I think that what you're doing is a technically very interesting and also very valuable to real people who care about how their data is served. So tell us a little bit about how anybody who's interested in the platform can get a hold of you or learn more.
Sure. Our website, you can find us there, anonymco.com. You can do a search for us on LinkedIn, reach out there. You can send me an email, gmud@mozilla.com. Any of the above. We love talking about this stuff. And even if it's just, I want to learn more, I'm not going to be a customer. It's just, I want to learn because I see this coming in the future and I want to get ahead of it. Like, we're totally game. A big part of why Mozilla bought us was certainly the commercial opportunity. They're a for-profit owned by a nonprofit, but also because they care about changing the way the web works in ways that are really focused on people as opposed to profit. And so a big part of our mission is to affect that change, not just make money. So we love talking about this stuff.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast and thanks for sharing the new approach.
Appreciate it.
All right, that wraps up this episode of the MarTech Podcast. Thanks for listening to my conversation with Graham Mudd, the SVP of Products at Anonym, part of Mozilla. If you'd like to contact Graham, you can find a link to his LinkedIn profile in our show notes or on martechpod.com, or you can visit his company's website, which is anonymco.com, which is ANOYMCO.com. If you haven't subscribed yet and you want a daily stream of marketing and technology knowledge in your podcast feed, hit the subscribe button in your podcast app or on YouTube, and we'll be back in your feed every week. All right, that's it for today. But until next time, my advice is to just focus on keeping your customers happy.